Hey Ubers, Vivian here with a video tutorial that's especially made for the Hampton Art audience. I want to share with you guys some of the great fun I've been having with incorporating texture into my projects for some grungy final effects. For this project, I used masking tape, which I love, to add texture, and I used a couple of really great Hampton Art woodblock stamps that I will show you through the course of the video. And even if you're not a big grunge person, as you can see with this project, there's a really grungy background, but it contrasts really nicely with a very pure central focal image. We'll also be using Gelatos, SMOOCH Spritz from Clearsnap, as well as mixed media inks from Clearsnap, fibers from Really Reasonable Ribbon, and glitter, which I haven't really used much in all the videos I've done so far, so that was pretty fun. So because this card is going to take a lot of media, you can use these techniques for cards, art journaling pages, mixed media canvases, and scrapbook layouts. But because I'm using a lot of media, I'm going to use a nice sturdy piece of decent watercolor paper. And I cut out a piece that's just slightly larger than the size of a standard base die for Sizzix Pop and Cuts dies. This is going to be a Pop and Cuts card, so I'm going to call this project Pop and Cuts Go Grunge. And I'm just wrinkling up some wide shreds of masking tape across my card front. I like diagonals, so I often create patterns in diagonals on my various projects. And you're just going to wrinkle it as you set it down in a pattern such that you can imagine fluids drizzling down those crevices to create some interesting patterns. So I did that. And now I'm just going to add some gesso, some white gesso, to the surface of the masking tape, just so I can add some tooth where media can adhere. So I'm not going to be too neat about it, and I'm also going to get it on various parts of my watercolor paper as well to create variety in the way media absorb into the surface of the watercolor paper. Now I've got gelatos. I've been using those a lot recently to create some really quick atmospheric background color. And those are from Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft. I used a silver one, and I also used a rather medium blue. I like that combination of blue against pinks and fuchsias, so I was very purposefully putting those on there. And as you can see, I'm just rubbing it in. It's the texture of lipstick. I love it. And making sure to get some of that gelato substance in my nooks and crannies created from the masking tape. And then once all my color is on my watercolor paper, I'm just going to take a soft watercolor brush. This is actually a really cheap synthetic brush. I would suggest using the soft synthetic brushes. You don't have to use the really expensive natural hair brushes to do these effects. I actually try to reserve those purely for my pure watercolor paintings. And now I'm going to go in with a darker blue. And when you use these gelatos into a wet surface, the pigment tends to be more intense. So I can add in some more intense areas of color right here. In order to get some of the media to move across my project, I often spritz water. And this takes a little bit of practice, but if you're afraid of committing to the spritz, this is actually a really great tool because it helps guide your media in the direction you want it to go. It also dilutes colors that are a little too intense. So I've wet my whole card front. And let me just show you a close-up of how that looks so far. I like those little chunks. It sort of adds to the grunge appeal. I'm not going to let those dissolve. I'm just going to leave them as is. And once that dries, I don't know what happened with my camera. I must have thought it was recording when it was actually paused. But I spritzed some SMOOCH Spritz all into those nooks and crannies. And because it's so grunge, if there were areas that had spritz that I didn't want, I just dabbed it off with a piece of paper towel. But I really sprayed a lot of it into the nooks and crannies. And this is what it looks like when it's dry. This is a Hampton Art stamp, and it's called Love Words PS0286. And it's got a great variety of typography in some really bold shapes. So I'm going to use that with some solvent-based ink, which is permanent. Just in case I add more media later, I want to make sure that none of this smudges around. So I'm using solvent-based black ink and sort of somewhat randomly stamping that all over my card front. While I do that, I just want to tell you, Hampton Art has some really great woodblock stamps that can be used, like this one could be used for a clean and simple project, but it also is really so wonderful for texture. Not using it so much for, using it for the meaning behind the words, but also just to add some visual interest aside from the words to your grungy projects. We have a whole variety of woodblock stamps that I've been using quite a bit. I'll show you one later in this video, which just has sort of like ripped out pages of a love novel as the subject of the stamp. We also have a Distressed Dots woodblock stamp. We also have a woodblock stamp that has some beautiful flourishes on it, so check the catalog. We also have sales now from the catalog, so you can go visit hamptonart.com and see a whole selection of stamps that we offer and get them straight from Hampton Art, which is great. So now that I've added in my stamping with the Love Words woodblock stamp, I'm just going in with some Clearsnap mixed media inks. This is their pigment ink. They're very wet pigment ink to lighten up some areas. And I also drag it across the top of my raised masking taped areas and to create more depth. So I'm setting my heat tool on, and this was a really great surprise. This combination of media is bubbling. Do you see that? Isn't that wonderful? I'm so glad I was able to capture this on camera. And it's that bubbling as it dries using the heat tool will be retained in the final project. It's a really cool sort of burnt look that is great for grungy projects. So I'm going in with some more mixed media inks in their white color, which is called Jasmine, just to lighten up some areas a little bit more. I've been thinking about what I love about mixed media, a lot of mixed media, is that nothing is permanent. It's all very additive in nature, at least this project is. So if something's not suiting you well, you can go in and add something on top and change it up. Maybe come up with something different, something unexpected. It's very spontaneous. I feel free to be spontaneous doing these kinds of projects, which is really great. So I'm going to start adding in some more subtle stamping with another woodblock stamp from Hampton Art. This is DF2135, and it's made with Diffusion. So it's Hampton Art and Diffusion. I'm really so in love with these woodblock stamps. Handling them is just such a pleasure, having it already mounted to the woodblock. So I'm using it with the solvent-based ink, and I'm wiping away using a baby wipe the edges because I don't like hard, straight edges in most of my mixed media projects. This way I can stamp it all over my project and not really have a clear beginning or ending. So I stamp it, and then I stamp it again to get a more subtle impression. Oh, and I wanted to tell you guys, really I'm using it for texture, and I love type. So but there are some words here. Let me just read you some of the phrases. It's very Valentine's-y and loving. There's, he blew her a kiss. Something stayed wonderful. Why, she whispered. He laughed joyously. Her lovely fingernail. It says that on there. Anyway, so this is what it looks like right now. And in just a second, we're going to start working on the interior of my Poppin' Cuts Goes Grunge card. So I cut out this piece using just the base die, the Sizzix Poppin' Cuts base die. I don't know if you're familiar with Poppin' Cuts, but there's all these different inserts you can put inside of the base die for different occasions. And the gist of it is that when you open the card, you get a little pop-up, a nice little dimensional surprise. So when I cut out this piece of watercolor paper initially, I just laid it on top of the Poppin' Cut die and gave about a ½ an inch extra all around. I'm cutting it now once it was all finished because just in case there was some warping from using wet media or the heat gun, I wanted to sort of be able to flatten that out and have clean, straight edges just by letting it dry and sending it through the machine. What I also do sometimes when I'm a little bit concerned about whether or not a die will cut through my project, these are really strong steel rule dies, but if I'm ever concerned, I will add a nice substantial piece of cardstock to the sandwich and get an extra little shim in there. So this Poppin' Cut die is set between 2 extra long acrylic plates plus my cardstock ghetto shims. And then I pull it out and it's all nice and clean. See how flat it is? So once I've got that piece, I'm going to start creating the embellishments for my card front. These are hearts that come, that coordinate with the Sizzix Poppin' Cuts dies designed by Karen Burniston. And this is just a little sizzlet that you can get in conjunction with the love-themed Poppin' Cuts dies. And I actually am in love with the shape. I don't know if you're crazy about hearts, but some hearts I don't like. And there are other hearts that I'm crazy about. And this heart shape is just really, really cute, and I think I'm going to be using it a lot. So I put hot glue, since it was available, it was already right there. I put hot glue on top of my heart that I had spritzed with the same pink sprinkle SMOOCH spritz. And I put hot glue on there, and then I very carefully just pushed some really chunky glitter into the still warm hot glue. This is a fiber from Really Reasonable Ribbon. It's called Leaves White, and you can find it in the trim section of the online shop for Really Reasonable Ribbon. And I've had this for a little while. I pulled it out and I was just sort of fiddling with it, and I realized after a lot of fiddling that it looked, in my opinion, really great, just coiled into a nice little nest. I would call it a little nest. So I coiled it up and I just hot glued it down, and I just really loved it. I love this fiber, and it's available in a couple of different spring colors as well as some richer autumn colors. I think I'm going to have to buy out the shop. So I inserted some of those glittered hearts as well as some stick pins from Jenni Bowlin. I realized after the fact that one of them was missing some of the rhinestone accents, but it's all good. And I also decided to put a little metal embellishment, heart embellishment, that I had picked up recently from Michael's, and it just says love on it. And I thought I had played around with other embellishments, but I thought sort of the dark tarnished metal would be a nice variety of texture in this card project. I also crushed up some white seam binding from the same shop and tied it into a little bow. I love seam binding because it's so easy to make bows with. You don't need any special tools to make a really beautiful bow. And because it was all crushed up, it created a little bit of extra architecture on the card front. And I tried to inconspicuously hot glue it down so that I could maintain that architecture long term. And so you have a grungy background with some really interesting textures that were created using some Hampton Art woodblock stamps and SMOOCH spritzes and various media, and an embellishment that pops even more, I think, than it would on a cleaner background or a more subtle background. It pops even more, and the purity of that white really gets to shine. So I was really excited about that. So this is the interior piece of my pop and cut die, and what you do is you take another piece of cardstock and you send it through the machine with the pop and cut insert, and this is the love word insert. I cut out some more hearts, and I'm using a PITT artist pen in black. It's got a medium nib, so it says M on it, and that's from Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft, to create some fun variety in my card. Gluing down some extra little hearts that came in the Sizzlit package that goes with the love-themed pop and cuts, and just outlining with the PITT artist pen. I have been doing a little bit of doodling recently. I'm not a big doodler, but one thing that's really great about doodling, I don't even know if you'd call it doodling, is just a simple black outline all along the edge of your project creates a frame. And I think if you can incorporate a little bit more irregularity instead of a very straight line, it sort of is in line with this grungy feeling. It's like if you feel like your project needs just a little bit extra something, it can be something like a little easy go-to technique, just adding that frame to make it all come together and make it pop just a little more. So I'm sorry, but I had to use this phrase, and now you're going to have the song stuck in your head for the rest of the day. But it's a good song. And I'm using a sort of muted light blue with some gauze just to add a little bit of finer texture. I sort of felt like the pink was a little bit too strong and I wanted to dull it down a little bit. I pressed the gauze into my white hearts and my white text as well because it just felt a little too bright. So it ended up adding a really nice subtle amount of texture to those areas that I ended up liking a lot. And as you can see, I also went over the white parts with some glossy accents, so I could have a little bit of extra dimension and shimmer without creating too much actual height in my interior because I want the card to be able to close. So I'm just going to pan around. That little metal heart is a Recollections metal embellishment, and all my fibers were from Really Reasonable Ribbon. Those little hearts are Sizzlits that were designed by Karen Burniston for Sizzix. And here you have a up-close and personal view of all the textures created from our mixed media techniques. And here's a little shot of all that wonderful texture, and another shot of our very pure white nest with love in the center. And I'll leave you with a close-up of all the different textures in the project. If you haven't yet, please visit me at my blog. That's contadinak.wordpress.com. And I have a bunch of other videos on my channel here on YouTube, and that's Contadinak. So I'll hope you'll take some time and watch them when you need a little break or some crafty inspiration. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.